Evening, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Hope you're all safe and well, and welcome to our chat with Nick Malue. See, I got it right.
Yeah.
Nick, an investigator, a writer, a film director. He does just about everything, basically. But I'm going to let Nick tell you what he does rather than me ramble on. So thanks for coming in, buddy. It's good to have you. I know we spoke before on video call, but it's good to have you, up here. So fire away. Who are you and what do you do? That's the kind of question you get in game shows, isn't it? Who are you and what do you do?
Well, for starters, in response, I just want to say it's definitely a pleasure coming on to your show. So thank you for inviting me on. So obviously, I'm a paranormal investigator. I've been a paranormal investigator now for 16 years now, since I was 12, and it's just been amazing of how much, how all these years have gone by, being involved in the field. And the interesting thing about me is that, when I get into this kind of stuff, what exactly I do, hi Kirsty, is that I slowly took my time in studying the stuff before I got to what I do. But in addition, now to also answer another part of that question is I'm also a member of a group called the Illinois Paranormal Force, or IPF for short, which we formed about 3 years ago. We're just like really any other type of paranormal group. We're not, looking for the best evidence out there. Some teams are, but we just more or less just try to look for what we find and, see if we have anything that could be, interesting to check, evidence wise.
Yeah. You're not looking for the ultimate, the holy grail kind of thing, You're just investigating and see what you get. If it's good, it's good. If no, then, that is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we're a much laid back and certainly more patient group. Like, we might say, that's something we like to see, but as like any group or an investigator, there's not always a guarantee of, finding the holy grail.
Hi, Kirsty. Kirsty and her hubby Andy and her family just recently moved over to your side of the pond, Nick. They're originally for Yorkshire. Hi, Sarah. They're originally for Yorkshire, but because of Andy's job, they're getting, I think it's 3 years they're over there for Kirsty. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. She probably will correct me if I'm wrong. So you've been out of paranormal for 12 years. What kind of got you started on it? What triggered your interest?
Well, it's interesting because, unlike most investigators who say they usually have an experience, it's because of an experience they had as a child. For me, that was not the case. It was more of a curiosity, actually. Honestly, even before I got into the paranormal, for starters, I was already like a huge fan of horror films. And growing up in the 1990s, I'm still surprised my parents got to let us watch this, but we got to watch the X-Files, which, at that time, it was still relatively new. It wasn't until about 2000, in the early 2000s, we did watch a show that we didn't really believe in it because it was just because we just only really watched around Halloween. But I don't know if you remember the show Scariest Places on Earth that used to be on ABC Family. Do you remember that show?
No.
It was a good show for its time, but we didn't really, take much into it other than watching, for Halloween. But the real start was, like I said, was at age 12, where I just happened to be sitting down on, turning the channel one day, and then all of a sudden there's this show that comes on the Travel Channel, and this was back before, Ghost Adventures and all these other shows took over. There's this show that's called Most Haunted that comes on. I'm like, oh, that's pretty interesting. That looks pretty interesting. I should check this out. And it's like the moment I started watching, I'm seeing exactly what all this was about. It got me into it immediately. And it's like from that day forward, even still at the age of 12, 13 years old, I was already I felt like I was already studying to go to college or something, because it was just something that drew me in completely.
Well, you and I are quite similar because when I was a teenager, I never, to my knowledge, I've never had an experience, but I was like, say, the horror films, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, anything with blood and guts in it, I watched. and that's basically, I mean, call me sadistic, I don't know, but I just like to see people getting cut open and losing the body, and the thing going me with Jason was, I love the Jason films, but I was saying this to Sarah, a partner of the day, in these horror films, you always run away. And Big Jason walks. Running. There's something I noticed.
They're running for their lives and they're walking very slowly because and I have to admit it was kind of a smart way because it's like if you just try to have them chase you, it's just going to be like a never-ending chase. When they're walking slowly, that just basically shows they're showing patience, like they're going to get hurt somehow or they're going to get stuck or something, and that's when they go for the kill, just like kind of like a normal predator would.
That's Sarah. She really does. I cringe. And Sarah's my partner. She doesn't like blood and guts. But I'll tell her if there's a good bit coming up. This guy's just. I was watching a film earlier on the day, and she was on video, called to me, and I says, "Well, I need to go because there's a guy just about to be beheaded, so I need to go and watch it." That kind of stuff. But that's what got me into the paranormal years and years ago. And again, I started getting into the ghost stories and the ghost programs and what have you. So you and I are quite similar in that way. There's Gail, she's a part of your team. I love a good horror. You can't beat a good horror film. But I'll tell you, I mean, as much as I love blood and guts, the best horror film I've ever seen was, I don't know if you've seen it, Nick, was The Changeling.
Yes. Oh my God, I love that movie. The Changeling is great. I mean, that's like one of the best examples of a haunted house horror film.
There wasn't any blood and guts in it. It was just the whole way it was made. They put it together. I thought, I thought that was, especially with the bathtub. You remember the bathtub kept banging and you could hear it through the whole house and that. See, nobody lost any limbs or anything, but I think that's one of the best films ever made, the way they made it.
Absolutely. I'm fortunate enough to I actually have a copy of it. So what I like about it's almost like an 80s update of like the movie The Haunting, because just the original one from the 60s, because what I love about it is that, like you said, it works so well because it's a film that doesn't rely on special effects. It's moving doors, it's shadows, it's sound effects and music. And that's all they use, just cheap effects.
And then they start to get into the blood and guts sells. It did for me, but I'll always go back to that horror film. So, obviously you start at the age of 12, then, the horror movies, etc. When you watch these ghost shows with Most Haunted, etc., when you went out in your first investigation, how did the two of them compare?
I think it probably has been, hey, Holly, she's actually one of the hosts of the Mom with the Network.
Hi, Jacqueline.
Hey, Jacqueline. So I think the way how it was kind of compared to me was, I mean, I know, of course, some people sometimes will get scared on investigations, especially for the first timers, like the ones who are just starting in the field. And I think what is so similar about them is just the intensity, for lack of a better term. You feel like, it's like watching a horror film in the paranormal shows, but it's all real stuff, and excuse me. What I always tell a lot of newcomers is that, it can be pretty scary sometimes as you see in like horror films, but as we all know, it's not as truly intense. It also depends on the location that you're at. So I think it's really just kind of the dark feeling, compared to both genres or kind of both films and shows, like both films and reality.
So your first investigation, I guess, obviously, was it a letdown, or did it,
Well, my first investigation, I started doing my first investigation when I was only about 2 years afterwards, when I was 14, but it was just a part-time investigation because of my age, I wasn't able to do a lot. So it wasn't a lockdown, unfortunately, but I did have the opportunity of investigating this place that's called it's a place that not too many people seem to know about. It's a place called the Hotel Colorado. And we're not talking about Hotel Del Coronado in California. This is actually in the state of Colorado. And we weren't able to check out all the locations because it is an active hotel. But although we didn't really have a lot that occurred, it did give me practice of how an investigation is supposed to be kind of held, even though we couldn't have the lights off or anything. So that was kind of a startup. But then a few years after that, now the real first lockdown for me was, and to this day, I still consider it one of my all-time favorite locations and one of my best investigations yet, was by the time I was 17 years old, I had the opportunity of investigating Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Yeah, that was an all-nighter one. And again, like I said, it is still to this day, for a first-time all-night investigation, that was a great start because, well, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a lockdown, actually, but a lot of the investigators that were there, they ended up leaving by around 2:30, and the next thing you know, my dad who was with me, we actually had the whole building to ourselves. I mean, like how much that was like the ultimate gift for me, for starting this kind of stuff. One of the first experiences that I had, which didn't take long for something to happen, was when we were on the 4th floor, which was the first place we checked out, and we had a tour guide that was with us who told us, it would probably be best if you have your flashlights on. So we turned off the flashlights, and maybe after a minute of total darkness, I start seeing these different figures going different directions because they say the 4th floor is said to be inhabited by shadow people. Mm-hmm. So, and it's still funny to this day, we did manage to film a lot of this, but this was back in 2010. So this was still at a time, before, we had Facebook Live and stuff. We actually had an old VCR video camera, now a 30-year-old video camera. It had night vision though, so if you hear me on the tape, you can hear me gasping, but it's not a gasp of fright. It's actually a gasp of excitement because I can't believe what I'm seeing, and for me to see like actual apparitions, or in this case shadow people, it was just such an unusual feeling for me, especially at that age, because I had to think to myself, am I really seeing this? Mm-hmm. And they all appeared transparent, and some were going to the right, some were going to the left, some were coming towards us, some were going away from us. And the way how they moved was, I wouldn't necessarily say they were walking, they were kind of more gliding. And the interesting part about this whole experience was, and I didn't know about the story at the time, was there was one figure that seemed to be crawling on the floor. Now, I had no idea that there was supposedly some other entity that's called the creeper. So I still believe to this day that what I might have seen was the creeper, but there was I could talk to you about the entire story, but yeah, it was a great start though, for a 17-year-old like me at that time.
A 17-year-old, especially in a place. I've watched a few documentaries and that on it, and so you're lucky over there. Highland, we really don't. I don't know about England, but up in Scotland, we don't really have places where that's the our ultimate, my ultimate location. I think it's Gales as well. The big long dark corridors and the big huge. You see it in American movies. Mm-hmm. The big huge basement and all the rest of it goes on for miles and miles.
Right.
That's what we want. We've got some old hospitals here, but they're all kind of fenced off, locked up. You can't get into them, no unless you do a wee sneaky. But we'll not say that on the live, All I say is we can't get into them. But I think, as you say, it's not the fear, it's the excitement when you see something. The same as the excitement when you put, as I said to you, we've been doing this certain estate, and people are probably fed up listening to me talk about it on lives, but we are buzzing about it. We've got 4 independent DVPs, and it's when you sit and you hear it for the first time or the second time you listen back to it, and it's a buzz that you get. It's a kind of tingly kind of buzz. Even there's a basement in this building, and it's not majorly long, but it's pitch dark. At night time, you cannot see a thing. And I love walking down it in the dark.
Right.
It's a vaulted basement, so there's doorways, all the way along. And I love walking along. You get a kind of buzz because you don't know what's going to pop out, if anything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was the same thing with me with Waverly, like was when we first walked in and when we saw what was, we got to see the first parts of the building, even I knew that, as soon as I walk into the threshold of this abandoned building, you just never know what's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to be intense. You don't know if it's going to be quiet. I mean, it's just like, I mean, it still took me by surprise though, when the activity began throughout the building.
But that's it. You know yourself, Nick. That's what some investigations are like. I mean, we've done a few, and we've sat there maybe half an hour, and you're like, nothing, and then it just starts. You get 2 meter will go off, the cat ball will go off. You start hearing whispers, or the girls they kept hearing in takes a breath. I never heard them, but they did. And you start getting all these bits and pieces. But you're sat there for maybe 60 minutes, and some people might just think, oh, this is a load of nonsense. I'm going home. But others, it's when it starts to kind of kick off, as we say here.
Hey, Tom and Amy, that's some of my co-hosts from Paranormal Mysteries. That's them.
Hey, Tom, welcome, buddy. And that's when the excitement kind of starts. And as you say, with investigations, you might not get anything, but it's practice as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's like what it was. I mean, like I said before, I mean, that's what, again, there's a lot of people out there who want to try to, there's always that belief that, everybody wants to be the best at times. And that's fine. I mean, that's what it's all about. But, some people take it too seriously. But as for me, for someone, who started at a young age, I took my time of actually, trying to get to that level. Hey, Eddie, I'm actually supposed to be investigating with him in about a couple of weeks. We're going to be investigating Middle Point School in Middle Point, Ohio. So he's offered to. We're going to be doing that in mid-October. He's offering me an investigation there. So good to see Eddie. But yeah, I mean, it's more of, again, the patience. But I think the really interesting thing about, and this is something I've told a lot of people about this investigation I had at Waverly, was because we were using an old video camera, even over a decade later, we still haven't seen the full footage of it because, again, most people don't use those type of cameras anymore, and finding a place to, get it transferred to a full tape so we can watch it on television, it's kind of difficult. So even a decade later, I have yet to have actually seen what the full footage is. So hopefully real soon we'll be able to check it out. And if it's great footage, I'm intending and hopefully going to try to turn it into a documentary.
Good, that'd be interesting. See, I've always seen you'll be at Middle Point.
Yep. Yeah, I've been invited to that, Holly.
Yeah, even Holly might be coming along with you, but it sounds like then.
Well, it's interesting. We're going to be at that same weekend that's supposed to be happening. We're also doing another Paracon out in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She's going to be there too. How about that? Awesome, hey. Holly. See you in a couple weeks then. We're going to be also in Fort Wayne, Indiana for another Paracon called DeadCon, which that is going to be hosted along with a good friend of mine, Jeremy York, who's also part of the network I've been working with. It's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, we're going to still be safe, obviously, but it's going to be a great, definitely great to have, especially during the middle of the October Halloween season.
That's it. Start again. October Halloween is the kind of the Christmas season for paranormal investigators, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
Basically,
I just described that to my parents last night because I mean we anytime the late September, early October season arrives, it's like we just start going crazy. We want to decide what we want to do, and but at the same time, sometimes it creates stress for us. I said, for everyone out there, like other jobs and stuff, where stress starts building up for Thanksgiving and Christmas. This is our Christmas season. This is where the stress starts building up. But in the end, it's totally worth enjoying because then you get to do all this fun stuff.
Well, that's it. I mean, people, as you say, people think you're nuts, but over here, people think we're nuts anyway. people think investigators are crazy anyway because we go to graveyards and old buildings and that and sit to 2 or 3 in the morning, rain or shine, and and
I still deal with that to this day myself. So that's something that's still, you can't quite escape it. You can deal with it, but you just can't escape it, unfortunately.
Do you not find it becomes addictive?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you not find it becomes addictive, but you go to one location and you need to go to another?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's always those locations out there that, I mean, while I do say, there are some locations that are my favorite, that even goes for places that, there's not a lot of activity for, because again, I'm also someone who refuses to give up on some of these places. Like, classic example is, again, going through the years I've been doing this, but when I was 19, I came back to Kentucky, but this time we were going to Bobby Mackey's Music World. The entire night that we were there, interesting place, don't get me wrong, but the entire night we were there was nothing that occurred. I mean, the only thing that we ever had was a brief cold breeze that occurred right before we even began the investigation. And I will tell you, it was a very, very hot night. So here, feeling a cold breeze was definitely unusual. But the rest of the night there was just nothing. And a lot of the other investigators were pretty disappointed. But I just had that feeling that, okay, maybe it's just because we chose a bad night, because you're going to have those nights when it's going to be quiet. So hopefully the next time that I happen to have the chance of going out there, it might be a little bit better. And hopefully you'll also be on a night when it's not too hot.
It's actually funny you say that, because we were out the night before last. We were out at a location. We never filmed it. I was actually showing, it's a new team member we've got. I was actually showing up and our friend around this location. But we decided to do just wee investigations in different parts of this building. And we were standing on a stairwell, and three of us were freezing, absolutely freezing. But with an EMF meter with it also gives you the temperature, and the temperature was reading like 22.7 degrees, so it was like 71, 72 degrees.
Oh, wow.
But we were standing there freezing.
Right, and all of a sudden the temperature raised, which there shouldn't be any reason for it to go up.
There were, according to the meter, we should have been standing there with shorts and a t-shirt on, but the threes were standing there freezing. And we actually got, I love telling people this because it's the first one, we actually got a ghost that smoked.
Really? Wow.
There's 2 parts to this building, and we'd been on the stairs. I said, right, come on, we'll have a cigarette and then I'll show you the next part. And just as we lit up a cigarette, the K2 meter went nuts. So I says, did you smoke? Were you a smoker? He says, put it up to yellow if you smoked. And it went to yellow straight away.
Wow.
I says, can you see my cigarette? The thing is, we never filmed it, because we weren't planning. He says, can you see my cigarette? If you can see my cigarette, make it go in yellow straight away. He says, would you like one? Would you like me to leave you a cigarette? Put it to yellow, and again went to yellow. And I said, well, just confirm for me that you'd like me to leave you a cigarette. Put the box to yellow, and it went to yellow. So I put it down on the stairs. I said, right, there's your cigarette. I'm going to leave it there for you. If you're going to say thank you, make the box go to yellow. And it went to yellow again. And we were buzzing.
I would too.
And then we went to another part, and the K2 meter went to yellow, and the girl on his way says, did you used to smoke? I says, don't bother asking, because I'm not going to have any cigarettes left. You know what I mean? So, but it was really, really weird. So I call it my smoking ghost.
That's awesome. I mean, for me, I think for most investigators, like, those are the type of conversations we always want to have. And I always tell, again, because we've been getting a lot of new, and when I mean new recruits, just in the Chicago, local areas for us, I always try to tell people ahead of time, whenever we go in these locations, again, there's no guarantee that something's going to happen. I always describe it as one of these things where you have to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. What would you think about familiarity? You know, if you keep going back to a particular location and, you know, whatever spirits are there will get to know you and you talk to you more or communicate more. What do you think about that theory?
I've actually had a few of those. I mean, not very many, but I've had a few of those kind of familiar. Jeez, I can't even say the words. Excuse me. It's one of those crazy words. Familiars. Let's just say that instead. Um, I think out of all the locations I've been to, there's only been probably about 2, maybe 3 locations that I've had that happen to me. One of those locations, which is again another favorite, is we have this school that's called Carl Schurz High School, which is in the downtown area of Chicago. Interesting thing about this school is that it's probably, as far as I know, the oldest operating high school we have in the city. It's been in operation since 1910. So because of its historical significance, they use it for more than just a school. They use it for events and stuff. But again, seeing how 100 years have passed, there's obviously no doubt in mind that the school is haunted. And we've done a few, and we're one of the few investigative groups to actually investigate that school because it's still a public high school. But the few investigations that we've been doing, whether we do like a ghost box session or a K2 or even just a simple EVP session, we've often gotten the voices saying that say like, "Yeah, I remember you," or they'll say my name. You know, a lot of the usual kind of responses, but it's still quite remarkable that these entities will still remember you, even if you haven't been at some of these locations for a couple of years. Like this school, Schurz, yeah, we may be only 20 minutes away, but again, because of COVID and for other reasons, we haven't been able to go back. I can probably guarantee that next time we have the opportunity, they're going to remember who we are.
I think I've got a question for Lindsay for you, and then I'll come back to that, Nick, if that's all right, buddy. Pop up with you. The best location you've been to, Nick?
Oh man, that's always a really good question because I don't just have just one best location. There's a couple good locations I've been to, so I'll make it as like my top 3 if that would answer. One of some of the best locations I've been to is, and this is actually a multitude of locations. It's not just one. Is I've been to Alton, Illinois, which is regarded as one of the most haunted small towns in America. There's literally about like 14 locations I know that have a lot of paranormal activity occur. You got, like, for a couple examples, the Mineral Springs Hotel. You got the Alton Prison, and then you also got the most notorious of them all, McPike Mansion. And I've had the opportunity of checking out all these places out. Great places to really get something out of. Number 2 was, again, obviously, like I said, Waverly Hills Sanatorium, place that doesn't disappoint me. And then 3, see, the last one always gets to you because you always want to try to think what's the next location. I think more recently we went to this place that's called the what was that place? Oh, the Gill House which is out in Ohio, which, again, we have the opportunity of investigating. And the responses we got from that place, another great place to check out. Check out. What I also found out, too, was the history of it is that despite that this was out in the state of Ohio, some of the architecture that went into the house's construction actually came from Chicago. So we even have a brief connection to that house. So I would say, top 3 locations would be Alton, Waverly, and the Gill House.
That's your top 3. Thank you. There you go, Lindsay. That's top 3 locations, though. Lindsay sounds awesome. But just get back to, you say the more you go to a place, the more a spirit gets to know you familiar. I think it's really, really, really great, fantastic if that happens. If a spirit becomes familiar with you in a good way,
right. Yeah, nothing like trying to attack you or kind of show disgust. I mean, and we always try to tell them too about how we don't want them following us home, and that did happen to me once, but it was actually in a good way. Long story short, this happened actually. I think it was early. No, it was early last. No, it must have been early last year or the year before. But when I was setting up my equipment, for this investigation. I can't remember what the place was called. This was out in I can't remember the name of the town. Antioch, Illinois. I had all my tools set up, and then when we finished the investigation, which again, another good place to check out, I realized that there was a piece of like one of the back pieces to hold the batteries was missing. It was actually for a flashlight. I looked all over the place, and I no matter how far I looked, even when people started leaving, there was nobody I couldn't find that piece. So it's like, well, just going to have to give up on it and maybe try and call the restaurant, next day or so to see if they could, hold on to it for me, because I know no one took it. Because I trusted everyone that was there. So I know no one's trying to play a prank or anything. And then as soon as I got home later that night, I still just can't stop thinking about this, relatively unimportant piece that could be just simply replaced. And as soon as I put the stuff down, I had to go out to the hallway for just a second in my house. And then when I came back, that piece was literally sitting right on the floor, almost like it was staring back at me. And I call one of my investigators immediately, saying, I think something followed me home, but returning something that was mine. And that was, again, normally I don't like things falling back, but that was like the first time that's ever happened. But it only came back to return what I was looking for.
And always, I know a lot of people don't believe in when people say spirits can move things and what have you, but I mean, something like that, how else can you explain it? It's not if you place it yourself. I've had similar things happen to me, not in the investigations. I'm in my old flat. My TV remote went missing from the front of my TV. I found it underneath my double bed, in the middle underneath my double bed. My keys came out the front door, and I knew, and I lived myself. I found them on the coffee table,
Right.
I'd come in from work, so my Buddhas would be. I was quite OCD with all my Buddhas in my house when I had my own flat.
Right.
I had them all in a certain way, and you come in for work and you'd notice that one in maybe even 1 or 2 centimeters it had moved. And I didn't have bets or anything, but that's moved, And then one night I kind of lost my temper where I was watching the TV, and the bin in my kitchen came flying off.
Wow.
And the bin was only got half full, it just came flying off the bin. I ended up shouting. I'm really sick because we're on the live, but I thought, will you beep, stop it, because I'm watching TV. I just really annoyed. And after that, nothing happened. So I don't know if I scared that away, but there's too many accounts of things being moved, people losing things, and then they suddenly turn up a day or a week later for that kind of theory to be sort of discounted, if that makes sense.
Right. And especially, for a first timer like me, when that started happening, it was just like, I did show the frustration, saying, where on earth could this be? And, and I always tried, and I told everyone all this when this happened was, I know it was not in my pockets. I even checked parts of, because it was January that we did this, so I even checked parts of my pants just to make sure if it didn't get stuck on. I checked everywhere, and I could not find it. So it just left me this piece of frustration. As soon as that piece suddenly showed up on the ground, it was just like all that frustration was finally gone. Like, thank you.
You start questioning yourself. I mean, this is TV remote. I was telling people, and the people I worked with about it, and they say, well, you must have put it there yourself. I say, well, why would I put my TV remote halfway underneath my bed?
Right.
There's no reason.
In this case, how did I happen to misplace an item at a restaurant several miles away from my house and then have it turn up on the ground? I mean, that's like, there's no way you could do that yourself. I mean, you would have to have someone pranking you to do that.
I mean, we all have moments where we get lots of concentration, and we put things that are, we might put our car keys in the freezer or something, something like that. Things like that. But there's other things that just cannot be kind of explained. So you're also a writer and a director as well.
You're right.
A busy man. You've got.
So I haven't really. I mean, in terms of the writer, I haven't actually written like an actual book of my own, but I have co-written a few stories to a few books. I don't know if you know someone, but the first book that I did was I don't know if you know someone by the name of Mike Ricksecker. He does something called Haunted Road Media. You know that? Does that name ring a bell?
No, I must admit it doesn't. No.
He does something. He does a show of his own, which he does on Tuesday nights. It's called Edge of the Rabbit Hole. Great guy, great friend of mine. Again, it's a kind of much like another type of paranormal show like this one. But he does these volume books that are called Encounters of the Paranormal Volume 4. Excuse me, different volumes, but I happen to do Volume 4, which my story is called A Paranormal Career Begins. And it actually explains, funny enough, the story of my investigation at Waverly Hills Sanatorium, because I thought, well, if I'm going to write a story, about, to have actually put into a book, then my Waverly story is probably the best one, because that was the one that kind of really got me to what I am today. So that was one of the first books. And then one of the other books, which I'm actually currently writing myself. This is actually one that I'm probably going to make it as a novelette, so a short book. It's not going to be like a full book. I don't have a title for it yet, but it's going to be based on one of the very few residential investigations that I was a part of. And it was still, to this day, one of the most controversial ones. Now, of course, obviously, I'm protecting everyone's names. I'm not going to reveal, where it's located or whatever. But to just kind of give a little brief preview is that what was originally supposed to be just a simple residential investigation became quite dangerous. And I know a lot of people always don't like the word, but this was actually one of the few cases where I could really pretty much say we were dealing with a demonic entity, because it showed all the signs. And it turned into possession. It eventually became even a brief exorcism, which none of us were authorized to do. So, I mean, in the end, everything was fine, but it was a pretty scary situation when that happened, because it was not only just a hazardous and scary situation, but it also at one point became a life or death situation. And that's when you get involved in that kind of thing, it's certainly no joke. So I'm writing a short. I'm actually really the only one out of the entire crew, as disturbing as it was for me, that's willing to talk about it. And that's why I'm writing a short story. But of course, obviously I'll be leaving a few things out for various and legal reasons.
That's understandable. Lindsay, a question for you. You need to just recap on how you get into. Lindsay missed the start, so
So Lindsay, to answer your question, what I was saying was at the beginning of the show was I actually started getting involved with this when I was very young. It wasn't because of a paranormal experience like most investigators have. It was more of a curiosity. I started watching horror films by like the time I was 6 or 7 years old, and I even had the opportunity of watching the X-Files. A few years later is when by the time I was about 12 years old, I checked out this show that's called Most Haunted. And from that point on, as the years went by, I started climbing through the ranks. By the time I was 14, I was on my first part-time investigation. And as you probably heard earlier, by the time I was 17, I was already on my first full-night investigation at Waverly Hills Sanatorium.
That's your title, The Situation.
Oh, that's a good title. I'll keep that in mind, definitely.
There you go.
Yeah, you might help me out, Lindsay. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. You were obviously that case you were working on. You were saying it was some kind of demonic entity energy. Do you think a lot of these people the word demon is jumped on too much these days?
Yeah, absolutely. It's jumped too much, and I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I know some people like them, some don't. I mean, obviously, I really don't as much anymore. Zach Bagans, especially, he's been using the word demon way too many times. Like, it was fine when he was doing that for the first couple seasons when they first started their show, because when they first started, I'll be honest, I was a huge fan. I mean, if you met me over a decade ago, I would have been saying, I've always wanted to meet Zach, as well as the rest of the crew. But now that, he's been doing this for whatever reason, of course, obviously one is for money. Because of what he always says, the word demon is used too much. And I could pretty much assure you that out of all the investigations that I've done, I've only, again, including that one residential investigation, there's only been 2, 3, maybe 4 investigations total in which I could say that they were demonic encounters.
Mm-hmm.
He loves that. That's fine.
Oh, you're upset, Gail. But I know a lot of people do jump. I know people who jump on the word as well over here, and they use the same word time. It seems they use the same kind of routine. Every investigation that they do, it's the same thing. You know what's coming next, right. And they seem to get a result with every single thing that they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you look at some of these investigations, it's just like some of them are they're all the same. Like again, like we were talking about how there's these investigators that are trying to find the best evidence, and when they claim that there's this demon or something like that, they get really excited about it, only for them to later find out it's not exactly what they thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm. It could be a grumpy old man or whatever.
Exactly. Spirit.
We take our personality with us. The only thing we leave behind is our body. So if we were grumpy in this life, the chances are we'll be grumpy over there. Maybe, and so if somebody encounters a grumpy spirit, I know a lot of people say, demon, that's a demon. So, it's not, that's my grumpy granddad you're talking to, sort of thing. And as I say, a lot of people do the same thing over and over. I mean, do you think it's a good idea to have a plan when you're going out to an investigation? Obviously, you've got some kind of idea in your head what you're going to do. When we go out, we tend to just play it by ear. Basically, we don't go out with a set plan. We'll get to a location and we say we could do that, we could go there, but we don't actually have a set plan. What's your kind of?
That's kind of like with us too. I mean, we, in terms of planning, the only real plan that we ever have is maybe check out these locations. But like when it comes to like the paranormal side of it, we just, just sit back and wait for something to happen and see whatever we get.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're going out on Saturday for an overnight investigation, and I did sit last night, and there's about 5 or 6 locations in this, area that I like to do, but I did sit and write, blah, 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 so-and-so go here. But the odds are we probably won't stick to it. And I think that's the best kind of investigation, that you just go, nothing's planned out and it just happens.
Right. Hold on one second. I'm going to shut my window just for a second because it's getting loud outside. Give me a second.
Right.
Sorry, I had my window open, and all of a sudden, someone's getting their chainsaw ready, and it's getting loud outside. So I didn't want it to interfere. Yeah, no, it's. And then for those who are watching, no, this is not Texas. It's not Texas Chainsaw Massacre here.
They were good films as well. I didn't like the remakes. No offense to the, no disrespect.
Yeah, they're okay. I mean, I love the gory matter of it, but for the most part, it's just like I prefer the originals.
The remake, I watched 1 or 2 remakes of various films, and they're okay,
Yeah.
But you can't beat the original thriller, like say Jaws or whoever it is. Freddy and Jason. When Freddy and Jason got together, I was kind of disappointed. I think we'd all waited for years, horror fans, when Freddy and Jason going to lock horns, and they got together, and it wasn't too great, There's Gail got a question for you.
How did I get rid of them? Well, the attachment that did follow me back, I actually didn't really need to do anything, because I think we figured that there were a few spirits at this particular restaurant, which, strangely enough, despite the appearance of the building, which I'm going to assume it was probably built back either in the late 1910s or 1920s, because it was being used during part of the Prohibition era. When you think of 1920 Chicago, you think of all the gangsters. And when you think of the gangsters, you think of Al Capone, who had complete control of the city. So this restaurant basically would probably be one of those hangouts for him. But also there were supposedly a few other deaths, and there just wasn't a lot of history to this place as there should be. As far because I've looked it up, I've still been trying to look up the info about this place. I just can't find anything. But according to some of the ghost box sessions that we had, we did have a few female spirits along with, I think, one child or maybe two. So what I'm assuming is, like, when I look back now, I'm assuming that one of these spirits of these kids may have taken the piece out of curiosity, and kind of just like we do here on this side, someone probably told them, hey, you got to bring this back to them. So they somehow followed me back, and that's when I found the piece in the kitchen. And after that, there was nothing else that occurred in the house. So I think it more or less kind of left on its own accord. It didn't really stay with me for the most part.
Mm-hmm. You see, you've done quite a few big locations. What about the Cecil Hotel? That's always, we covered the Cecil Hotel with Patty Negri on, because obviously Ghost Adventures done it. So I got in touch with Patty and asked her if she would come on, what she did, and we had a chat about it. Do you think the Cecil Hotel was paranormal, or do you think it was just, there's a logical explanation?
It's hard to tell because, first off, Cecil Hotel, I'm sure I'm not the first to say this. This is obviously, that's another location I've always wanted to check out. I actually learned about the place when they had it because it was also featured on the 5th season of American Horror Story. That was shot at the hotel too. It's hard for me to tell if it's like normal or if it's paranormal for what's happened there, because as we all know, that place has had a history of suicide since the construction of the building, now almost 100 years ago. Again, 1920s, I think it was built. I don't know if I'd be able to say it's not normal, but at the same time, it can't be a coincidence that there's, even if it's not paranormal, there's some type of negative energy or force field surrounding that place. Because, you look back at the building's history when the suicides began, and we're still getting these, deaths occurring to this day. It's just like a never-ending cycle. I mean, you when you look at places, historic hotels, or even other type of places, and it's had a history of death. It's had a history of suicide, or whatever the case is, or murder even. Usually a lot of those locations, that usually only occurs when that building was originally what it was, whether it was a restaurant, whether it was a school, and then once you turn it into a hotel or, a historic landmark, those deaths have stopped because now we're treating the building differently. We're not treating it like it used to be. But the Cecil Hotel has always remained its title, which has always been a hotel, and yet the deaths continue. So it's a very negative energy. I think it's more of a very negative type of energy that draws certain individuals in. And you not only just have the suicide victims, you also had, a few well-known serial killers that had been there. You had Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. You had the copycat killer. You also had the person who murdered the Black Dahlia back in the 40s. So it also draws in not only the suicides, but even well-known serial killers.
It seems to be a kind of magnet for,
Exactly. It's like a magnet.
And as you said, there is, when Ghost Adventures done it with Patty, and there's one, I don't know if you watched her or no, but there's one particular bit where she's at a window, and I think it's room 712, I think it is, and she got this overwhelming urge to jump out the window, and you can see her face, kind of the looks in her face, and I think to grab her back. We spoke to Patty about this, and she did say, I don't know what it was, but I just had this urge to go, basically. And then people, hi Penny Roll, but then somebody grabbed her back. There's a location like that here. It's not with people. Laura and her team, we are going to investigate it, as Laura asked us a couple of times. It's the Suicide Bridge. People might laugh at this, but it is, true. Dogs seem to jump off and commit suicide in this bridge.
Yeah, now that you say that, I've heard of that bridge. Yeah, like it, and it's only certain type of dogs too. It's not like all different type. all different types. It's only like certain types. Again, I can't remember what the name of that bridge was, but I've heard so much about it that makes you wonder. Again, it has that magnet feeling too, where maybe not necessarily people, but in this case, dogs. And I've even heard that some dogs are actually known to jump off that bridge, go back up, and jump off a second time. There are some that actually managed to survive. Although I think well over 20 years ago, the first person had jumped on that bridge. So does this mean we're going to start seeing a surge of people this time jumping off that bridge? I'm not sure, because as far as I know, I haven't heard of any more. But the activity with the dogs, though, I heard continues.
So I can't explain the one with the dog. Pavlov's Factory or Fake TV show. It was one of the girls in our team was telling us about it, and we're going to go and investigate it. It's just, I mean, I know some people might laugh at it. Your dog committed suicide, but it does happen. It has happened.
I mean, how else can you explain it? I mean, it's just one of those kind of things that you have to be there to really believe something like this, especially even though it's not entirely paranormal. You're still going to have the disbelievers out there, and of course, you also got not only the disbelievers, you also have the accusers out there saying, well, someone may have actually thrown this dog, when you later find out that there was no evidence whatsoever, no reason for people to commit such a violent act by throwing their dogs off a bridge. Like, they're walking through that bridge one day, and then all of a sudden their behavior changed, and without warning, they'll run and jump off, and a lot of them, sadly, to their deaths.
They went. It's with the forest in Japan.
Yeah, the suicide forest, Aokigahara Forest.
I've not studied much on that. I have watched some bits and pieces on it, but a lot of people tend to go there. Now, I don't know whether maybe it's because people went before, so people are just, I'll go there and do it because that's where everybody goes, kind of thing. Hi, Vale Doc. Good to see you. I hope everything's settled down now. Vale's from Mississippi. I'm sure I've got that right. So we'll be getting her back on soon. She's settled down the house and what have you. But I know a lot of people go to that forest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much. I mean, I know there's a lot of history to that forest. I mean, I don't know exactly when this all started, but I do know that they said that ever since the 1950s, the Japanese, residents have been committing suicide there. And nowadays, since then, they put all these signs literally all throughout the forest, both in Japanese and English. Simple signs like you see with, life is precious, or think of your family and friends. And as crazy as what I'm about to say next, they say it's considered either the second or third most popular place to commit suicide at. And when you got all those suicides, again, you also have to think of the activity, which in Japanese folklore, they call them the yuri, which are said to be like, I think it's considered Japanese for angry spirits. So you got the spirits of those who commit suicide, but you also got the yuri, which are the angry spirits, which are usually those of like children and the elderly. And those are usually people who were not necessarily murdered, but were left abandoned and basically left to die. So you also got a lot of the betrayal of those who passed away as well. And considering it's in a forest, it's located on the base of Mount Fuji, which is, several miles away from Tokyo or any other towns, that nobody's going to find their way, nobody's going to find them. They're not going to find their way back, or if they try to, they'll die of exposure. And it's just like, there's just a lot of death in that forest to this day.
There's a lot happened in it. We're Fineville Dog. She's in North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
That's where she is. We've been fine. I dropped you a wee mail later on, honey. Vale, she was on with us last year quite a few times when we first started out, and she's a really, really nice lady. So, as I say, you get your finger in quite a few pies. You're a director as well.
Yes.
So
in terms of being a film director, now for starters, I haven't really been doing that for a couple of years now, because I've been taking a long-deserved rest. I made my very first, not paranormal, but horror film documentary 3 years ago, although it actually took me about a good 5 or 6 years to make. It's called 25 Scariest Movie Moments. And as you can very well imagine, it's a countdown of the 25 most frightening moments in film history. Now, despite its name, it's actually a fan-made sequel to a number of documentaries that have been made over the years, almost in the last 20 years. So, like, there were documentaries that were made, like, for both the U.S. and the U.K. You had the 100 Greatest Scary Moments in 2004. Later that year, they made another one for the U.S. called the 100 Scariest Movie Moments, then 30 Even Scarier Movie Moments. It just kept going on all these years. So, and again, like I said earlier, being such a huge fan of horror films, and at the same time, during my 2 years of high school, I also took film class. So I was able to learn how to do filmmaking, and that's what kind of motivated me to eventually try to get into the film business. And after a number of years not seeing any more of these countdowns coming along, I decided that I was going to make my own countdown, but as a fan-made sequel. So you're not going to see movies like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, because those movies have already been taken on those lists. So essentially, this is a list of movies that didn't quite make it to these other lists, or films that have recently came out in the last couple of years, like, let's say, The Conjuring. So that movie's added onto the list. But in terms of actually making the film was quite difficult, because unlike a normal film, this was, again, an actual documentary. You had to get a lot of people for this film to interview them. And kind of like, again, kind of something like this, kind of like your background. We had like a black background to kind of give it that dark, unsettling feeling to it. But of course, like anything with anything, like with any film, you also had to do the editing, which that probably took a lot more longer than, doing the actual interviews themselves. Like the filming stuff is easy, but the editing takes a while. And I had to do all the editing myself. So that's why it took about a good 5 or 6 years to really put this together, through trying to get the right people and then also trying to get, the editing through. But it wasn't really till about, finally 3 years ago, I had it released theatrically for the very first time at Schurz High School, in fact. And as far as I know, it was definitely a success, because I know a lot of people liked it.
There you go, as long as it was a success. Now, as you say, editing is, Sarah does all our, I don't know if we do any major videos, but we're planning to, with this estate that we're planning to do sort of documentary style, things. Never done it before, so it might be rubbish, who knows, but we're going to give it a go. But as you say, I watched Sarah like 6 hours to edit a 2-minute bit of video, to put a 2-minute video together, and I wouldn't have the patience for it, I must admit. I'm not gifted with patience, so to sit and edit, and I watched her put bit by bit together, I think, no.
That's kind of the sad part too with editing, is that because I did notice when we had it shown theatrically, was you're always going to have those mistakes that you missed. So like during parts of the film, I thought, well, wait a second, I don't remember this, or I could have sworn I changed that. So the worst part about this is, I'm excited that I finally got it done, but there's still a worst part about it, is that now I got to go back and refix those mistakes and then go through the long process of having it converted. But in addition, there will be more editing that will eventually occur with this film, because, believe it or not, this film was originally meant to be an 1.5-hour documentary. Instead, because of the amount of interviews and also footage I had, it ended up becoming a mini series. It actually ended up becoming a 3.5-hour film. So we had to basically cut it down to like part 1, part 2, and part 3, so they could be much more manageable. But even cutting that down, I knew that I wasn't sure if that was going to really do a lot, trying to keep it, separate. So it was, and the experience of having it on the screen was, again, this is where the editing will come in eventually, was all of a sudden, when you see your own film being put onto the screen for the first time, and you start seeing all this footage occur that you put together, where you start thinking, I don't really think this type of footage is really necessary anymore. So, I might have, as much as I hate to think about it, I may have to go back and remove some of that footage, which would make it a much more manageable time. So we're hoping to eventually get it down to the original plan, which is an 1.5-hour film.
It is a lot of work. What about, obviously you've done a lot with film work, videos. What do you think about these film curses? You know, what I say, poltergeist. You know, the curses are meant to be attached to certain films. What's your theory on that? You know, like the poltergeist, the exorcist. People involved are people that starred in it have all passed away various ways.
Right. It's hard. That's a really good question, to be honest, because I've heard about the curses that are sometimes involved with these films. I mean, like you said, they had something called the Exorcist curse. They also had the Poltergeist curse. You know how some of the actors involved, like you had the murder of that one girl, and the main character passed a year or so after the third movie was released. And The Crow, yeah, there's that one too. That had a curse to it as well. In terms of curses, man, that's a really good question. Like I said, I think there's definitely. I don't know if I'd really call it a full curse. I mean, I think maybe part of it could have been, but there definitely was some type of bad. I think it's more of bad luck that happened to occur because I guess I guess the best way I can really describe it is that it may have been, when you get involved in a certain story and you put a lot of work into it. Hey, Justin, I know who he is.
Hey, Justin's out, Renee.
He's great. When you get involved in a particular story, especially when it's involved in a film, I think there's going to be something that's not necessarily an attachment, but something that's there's going to be some type of effect because of the negative atmosphere of a particular story, whether it was based on a true story or if it was, or if it was changed to kind of make it look like a completely separate story. I think there's always going to be some type of, again, it's like a magnet almost for some type of just this bad vibe that goes on. So I would say, could a curse be involved? I would probably give it a yes or no to it. So it's basically both, or maybe, that's the best way I can really answer that.
I would stick with maybe. I would stick with that. I mean, it's like Amityville. I love The Crow with Brandon Lee. That was a good film. That was a good film, The Crow. It's like Amityville. It says it was an Amityville curse, but then we've done lives in Amityville, and I don't know. Amityville's kind of 50-50 for me whether it's actually true or not.
I mean, the Amityville Horror, it's funny you mentioned that. I should have mentioned this earlier. The Amityville Horror actually was my very first haunted house case that I studied, again, when I was 12. And, of course, obviously, because this was still during my early days in the infancy of getting involved in the subject, my view of, what happened at Amityville was hard to tell because, ironically enough, because I was already getting involved in this stuff, it was around the same time the 2005 remake with Ryan Reynolds came out at theaters. And I still remember, I mean, it was the kind of film, as I recall, that you really knew about it. You weren't old enough to see it, but you just knew kind of like how somewhat notorious this film was when it first came out. And that's when I also discovered the original film along with the sequels that came out. So I was able to see the original trilogy, but not the remake until about a year or so later. And watching the film, again, I was watching the films first before watching any documentaries on it. At the time, I thought everything I saw in the film really happened. But then afterwards, when you go back and actually look at the story, you're thinking, well, I may have believed it a little bit too much, but now I can kind of understand, where kind of some of this activity was coming from. And funny enough, I'm surprised I don't see them very often, but we do an event that's called the Chicago Ghost Con. And at least within the last 2 years, not recently, I would say it was probably around 2000. It was either 2015 or 16, or no, it was 2016 and 17. We actually had one of the kids at the event. His name's he's not called by Lutz. His name's Christopher Quarantino. And when you actually hear from someone like him, along with his brother Daniel Lutz, who did that documentary film called My Amityville Horror, they tell a very different story of what actually happened in that house. Like he says that, I mean, they'll both tell you that while they believe the book, the story itself is true, the actual time that they were living in that house is way, way different from what you see in any of the films And they also have a very different view of, like, how their dad, George Lutz, was, because we've now recently discovered that he actually was involved in the occult. And that's where kind of the paranormal aspect to it. So in other words, like in this case with the Amityville, there was paranormal activity, but it wasn't what you see in the films. There was no flies. There was no, blood dripping from the walls or pigs looking into the windows, but they actually had a lot of, basically negative activity that was being drawn from George himself. Yeah. And the story that they both tell, it's just, I don't think you really expect it for the most part.
See, I watched Amityville when years and years ago, and so we did a live on it last year. I'd never really looked into the story. One thing I always did find strange was the DeFeels, with Ronnie DeFeo, with the gunshots. Why did nobody hear them?
Right.
But then when we were doing the live, I started to research it. Now, I'm not saying by any means that, excuse me, that nothing happened, that it was fake, but just a lot of the stuff that I read suggested that, as you say, the stuff that happened in that house was portrayed in the film never actually happened. The Lutzes as well, no disrespect to them. This is just what, what I read. This is what's claimed, that they were more interested in making a movie deal after it. The family that moved into the house after the Lutzes have never ever reported anything happening.
No, not at all.
The guy that was trying to broker the movie deal with the Lutzes turned out to be Ronnie DeFeo's defense lawyer.
That's correct. Yeah, and even strangely, it's like when also the remake came out, George Lutz, even though he didn't really have contact with his kids anymore, he sued that film as well because it didn't stay true to the original story. And they claimed that, well, we made this film because we just recently discovered some other information that was never originally like in the book or in the original film. Of course, that didn't matter. And, the ironic part is when they made the 2005 film, they actually filmed parts of it here on the outskirts of Chicago. In fact, they actually filmed it up in Silver Lake, Wisconsin, which is where the house is set, which is only like about an hour away from me. So I was completely unaware that this even more controversial remake was being filmed not too far from where I live. So it's just still a very controversial story. I mean, not only back then, but even today, because now we're starting to see these other films that have been made. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Conjuring series, they briefly talk about it, and it does show briefly in the beginning of the film, but people were asking, is there going to be an Amityville film coming out? They said, James Wan, the director, had said they're basically focusing on every other case that Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated except that case because they don't want to get the controversy. They don't want to get sued. And most importantly, it's been done so many times that if they made a film with Amityville, it would really not be part of the franchise. It would just be its own film or be part of the Amityville franchise. So that's why, even though it's mentioned, they never actually, have a film set just for that location because they don't want the controversy.
I totally understand that. I mean, you go into Prime and there's that many, I noticed a few weeks ago, there's that many films with the name Amityville in the title.
Yep. There's also been those rip-off films, which, in my opinion, the actual Amityville franchise, and this includes the remake as well as the Amityville Haunting and also two other films that have came out in the last few years. In my opinion, there's really only about 11 official movies of the actual Amityville case, whether it's based on true stories or not. When it's actually staying close to the title, there's been like 11 movies since the original one from 1979.
All right, so see, the biggest puzzle to me about Amityville is the gunshots.
Yeah, always they were shot and there was no silencer, and everybody said that supposedly nobody heard it. Like, you look at the films, and especially the original series, it's understandable that the house is basically well over several hundred feet, if not a few miles away from some of the other neighborhood houses. But in reality, the house, like where the actual house is, it's right next to a few other houses. So I live in a house, right next to other houses. So if I heard a gunshot going off, I could probably guarantee I would have heard it. And the walls were not soundproof either.
I think it was 6 or 7. But then they also said that they found gunpowder residue on the eldest daughter. Hands.
That's what they heard. I mean, that's what they said. I haven't really found it. Of course, obviously they were all shot, but I don't know if the residue actually existed because, honestly, the residue, that was one of the newest pieces of information I recently found because you've probably seen I've been doing paranormal presentations lately as well as historic presentations. And I just recently did one. Well, I haven't done it yet, but I did create one for the Amityville Horror. While I am focusing on part of like the story of what supposedly happened, at the same time, I want to try to be as true as possible to whatever, really happened, especially for new recruits, because considering that this was my first case ever that I studied, I want to kind of give like that same kind of experience to new folks that are interested, let them know like what really happened in that house. I mean, still tell the story, but then also reveal the reality of what happened.
That's it. You need to be as true to the story, just for, new recruits, but in respect to anybody that might have been affected by it way back, in the 70s, 80s, I forgot, 1974, I think it was.
1974 was when the murders occurred, and then 75 was when the Lutzes moved in. And I'll even tell you this, the new family that moved in, while they strictly said that they had no paranormal activity that occurred, and most people don't know this, I just found this out, they actually did hire a psychic investigator because while they didn't buy into the stories, I think probably more or less they just wanted to make sure, because you sometimes do have that hesitation. They actually did bring in this. I don't remember. I don't know if they ever said who it was, but they brought someone in just to check, and they said that there was supposedly an entity, but not whether there was a true entity in this house. It sounds like to me that it was not responsible for the murders, the activity that supposedly happened when the Lutzes stayed there, and whatever was there. I mean, whether there was something truly living in that house, I considering that no one else has reported anything, it probably, as I sometimes call it, could have just been a part-time haunting where it may have been there for a short period of time, and by now it's probably long gone.
It probably disappeared. Probably moved to another neighborhood or something.
Another house, or could have moved on to the other side. It could be anything.
But yeah, you see, you need to get the story as accurate as possible.
Right.
Because another side is that if you are writing a story or you're telling people a story, if you're not accurate and they find out, then it puts you not in jeopardy. It puts you in a bad light as well.
Right, and that's why it goes back to when I was saying about writing my own story, that I got to be, again, sometimes you do have to keep some of the stuff out, but in terms of the story, I try to stay true as possible, but also, unlike, in the case with Amityville, I'm keeping the names protected. So, like, if anyone ever came up to me and asked, do you know where this location is? I'm not going to reveal other than that it took place in Chicago. And there's we got plenty of houses that, we got historic areas. We got plenty of old houses that, have history of haunting. So it could be any one of them. I would even probably say it's whatever you want it to be. Like, I'm not going to tell you what the location is.
I mean, there are people out there, teams, individuals who will make, take you to a location, and I've heard them do it with Greyfriars. So take you to a location and they'll tell. I mean, we've studied Greyfriars for years, and it sounds like Eddie. A lot of people come to me if they're wanting to know anything about Greyfriars. I'm not any expert by any means, but it annoys me when I'm watching maybe people doing investigations and, the guy's telling the other people there the story, and he's like 300 years out with the history. Right. They're all wrong, and it's just, it does annoy you.
It does. It really does. So that's what, and it's funny. Again, all this talk about, writing stories, and again, even honestly, I still consider myself, when I make these presentations that I put together, it is kind of like writing a book, because instead of being an actual book, though, you're telling it on the screen. And again, you look at Amityville, and believe it or not, I should have mentioned this earlier, I actually made, because most people don't seem to know, that movie, The Changeling, did have a true story behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually did find the story, and I had to go through several websites, because one of the things I always want to make sure of when I make these presentations or a story is make sure each page has this, maybe not say the same words, but has the same exact saying in the story, because you may come across one page that it talks about a location or a legend or something, and then you go on to another page and they're saying something completely different. So, eventually you got to figure out, which pages are telling it the most and which ones are saying it the less. So that's in the case with the true story behind The Changeling. It's like, wow, I didn't even know this was a true story and what they say about it, but I had to go through several pages just to be entirely sure that what they're saying is true before I proceed.
I never knew excuse me, I never knew that was a true story. Oh, I love that. I never knew it was a true story.
So the it's not entirely a true story. Like, for example, like most of what happens in the film didn't actually happen in real life. So, which I can tell you, it's based on it was based on a building that sadly it's no longer there. It was a place called the Henry Treat Rogers Mansion, which was located in Colorado. It was where oh man, I'm trying to remember. It was someone who worked on the film. It was fortunately I have the page up, so give me 1 second here. It was it was the film composer Russell Hunter. He moved from New York into the Henry Treat Rogers Mansion, which is near Cheeseman Park in Denver, Colorado. And he was just like in the film. He was unlike the film. He didn't lose any family, but he just wanted to find a place that just wanted to have a place of his own. And he got this mansion that was a really good price. And this was back around 1968. But the next thing he knew, shortly afterwards, he started hearing all this noise. He started hearing these noises. There was the piano playing. When he knew he was the only one in the house. And then this is where, again, we don't know if this actually really happened. But just like in the film, though, at one point he claimed he had came across this secret space where he found a diary, which he claimed was over a century-year old. So this would have meant that the diary would have been written back in 1868. But the house itself, though, wasn't built until about, I think it was 1896. So we're talking about a good, over almost 30 years after supposedly this diary was written. So before that, it was just plain farmland. And just like in the film, they did find out, they claimed that they were speaking to a young boy who not necessarily was murdered, but was locked, who was locked in a particular room and was supposed to claim an inheritance, which he never got. But again, there's the controversial part, which was it's later found out that the house wasn't around back in the 1860s. And as far as we know, there's no young boy that had ever, or disabled boy, because supposedly he was in a wheelchair, just like in the film, that ever existed. So the truth about it is it's hard to tell, but sadly, like I said, the mansion doesn't exist anymore because it was torn down in the 70s because they just couldn't, I guess the house was falling apart, and also claiming that the activity followed Russell, and they just needed the house demolished. But today it's now a park, and funny enough, that actually served as the inspiration. That also served as the inspiration for the movie Poltergeist, because that was probably, because I know this is true, it's probably the true location where a neighborhood was truly built over a cemetery. And to this day, they still find bones throughout. And good portion of the neighborhood, they said they've had a lot of activity, but they truly built over the cemetery and only moved, well, not all of them, but moved some of the headstones.
It makes you wonder, this location we're doing, this estate we're doing, and we're convinced that there's graves there. And the investigations we've done, we've had lots of little clues, wee bits and pieces that kind of point to this one particular area. And we found out Saturday, Sunday, that this area we've been looking at, that there used to be a church on it.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, it's all bits and pieces. So, well, church, maybe there is graves, but I'm convinced that there's graves somewhere. But it's when you get places that are involved in a story, and then you look back and you find out that place was never never existed when the story took place. You know,
Right.
It's like a prime example over here would be Tyndale Farm. You've heard of the Pendle Witches.
Right.
Tyndale Farm has always been a popular place to be investigated. And there is one TV show that went there and claimed they got all sorts of activity. But it turns out that Tyndale Farm wasn't even about in 1612. There was nothing.
Right, yeah. It's like you later find out that they claim they got all this activity, and then they might have gotten one or two pieces, maybe even three if they're lucky. But when they actually reveal, like when you start seeing what really happens, you start even questioning yourself. Like some of the activity saying, you know, this really happened, or you know, did someone just happen to accidentally make a noise and they just assumed it was? Because again, it's funny because when I was talking earlier about when I went to Bobby Mackey's Music World, there was someone that I already knew this was not true evidence because while we're sitting doing a ghost box, well, not a ghost box session, but one of the investigators was using one of the ghost apps, which I think we all know a lot of them are fake. There's only about maybe four, maybe five that I think are actually legitimate. I mean, I use the Spiritist, I use the Necrophonic, I use the Echo Box. And there was also one other one that I recently discovered that does work. It's called the EVP shifter. And after trying it a few times, I pretty much believe it does work. And also the Sono X10 Spirit Box. So those 5 apps, in my opinion, are the only ones that actually work. But this person was using a ghost radar. And she claimed she was getting all these answers from the ghost radar. And I just really wanted to step in and say, you know, you're not really getting answers. That's just the phone doing it. I wasn't annoyed, but I just really wanted to say, you know, you might as well get rid of it, throw that app away because you're wasting your time.
We just made it. We've tried, you know, 2 or 3 apps, but Sarah is right into, but we use the Necrophonic now. We find that's the best one we've used so far.
Yeah.
We've tried other ones, and you think, no, that's
aside from those 5 apps, it's just really the other ones. I don't even depend, and it also makes you more suspicious when they have them for free, or you have to pay them for a really cheap price. Like the ones like the Necrophonic, the Spiritist, the Sono X10, the Echo Box, and the EVP shifter. Those, you know, you got to pay a good amount of money for them. So if it's showing that it's you have to pay a good amount of money, or a lot of people, or if you witness it yourself and it stays true to what it's saying and it's not fake or anything, those are the ones you want to go for then. But at the same time, though, the other apps are the ones you got to watch out for because those are usually scams. So the free ones that they wouldn't be giving you these kind of things for free for the most part. You would have to pay something. So when you see an app that's really cheap, it's like, or if I happen to see, I'm like, you know what? I'm moving on. I'm sure there's going to be something better than that.
I'm going to stick a couple of comments over there. I watched with the Pendles. No, as in fact, Penny, that Tyndale Farm wasn't even there. Same as Sadler's Farm. They reckon Sadler's Farm is the site of Malcolm Tower, but we've done our research into it, and where Alice met the Thomas Law, the peddler, was actually nowhere near where Sadler's Farm was, because we're thinking, obviously that's where Alice lived, was Malcolm Tower, but where she met Thomas, but where she met the peddler was away over near home, which is nowhere near Sadler's Farm. You're talking 30, 40 miles between. So, you know, there's a lot of different theories.
Right.
To get the right account, you need to read Thomas Potts's account. That's the only handwritten one that was written at the time, and it's still, you can still get copies of it. But Thomas Potts, I was just saying with Bobby Mackey's. When people rely solely on that, it's interesting now that Penny says that, because we're actually trying some old school stuff. There's Kerry Angel saying hi to you.
Hey, Kerry, she's another co-host. Yeah, she's one of my other co-hosts. Good to see you, Kerry.
We tried it once, it didn't work. We've got to keep a compass. We tried using a compass. So we tried it once so far.
Compass. started using that too. Yeah, I mean, I recently tried that when I was out in Kansas, and just the. I mean, I know it's one of the old. I mean, trust me, I always usually do prefer using the older fashioned tools. I mean, I got a lot of the modern stuff too, but the older stuff is always, much more reliable, more sufficient, I guess. Because first off, these are some of these tools that have existed. I mean, people have used those for spiritual communication forever, if not thousands of years. All these other devices have been, including the apps, have only been made in the last decade or so. So the compass, it was actually an idea that someone told me about, which I never once thought twice of ever using a compass. Again, the first time I used it, nothing came out of it as I was hoping to, but I haven't given up hope yet, because this is kind of basically, it was a first time using it. I know some people aren't crazy about using it, but I'm willing to give it a chance, to see how it actually works. It's always worth giving it a chance.
That's exactly what we're doing. The other thing we're trying with Sarah's idea, now it might sound nuts to some people, but it's a bit of ordinary everyday clothesline. And I cut up one of my old T-shirts and tied into strips, tied the material on the clothesline, and we hung it up. Now, when I hung it up, there wasn't any wind or draft. The idea behind it is that you hang it up in a kind of draft-free zone, and you put a lighted candle underneath it. And if the material moves and the candle stays true, then there's no any draft. There is, in fact, probably a spirit moving it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
I've heard recently about the candle, and that's another interesting idea of trying to use. But unfortunately, though, at least over here, it's hard to, have a candle lit, for spiritual communication. Because like any building, it's always most of these, I think 95% of these places that we investigate, they say, it's obviously like absolutely a no smoking zone. So if you can't smoke, then that also means you can't have candles either. So candle idea, it's a great idea, but you can't. But it's something that's not accepted by a lot of those places.
Yeah, crystal pendulum sometimes. What's your thoughts on the human pendulum?
Well, I actually have used a crystal as well as a simple pendulum. Man, that's it's another favorite of mine, because again, it's another old-fashioned type of tool. Honestly, I mean, let's put it this way. If you look at, the pendulum, a crystal, dowsing rods, again, it's like, I think you get a lot more result. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of the other more modern equipment, you get a lot of stuff too, but I think you get most results out of those old-fashioned type of tools, because think about if, you're communicating with someone, and this is someone who may have died, let's say, over 100, 150, 200 years ago. They were probably around when those type of tools existed. Now, here we are in 2021, and we got all these different devices out there. There's going to be some entities out there who will say, what is this thing? Because, you have to think, 100, 200 years, well, especially 200 years ago or more, they lived far before the time, like when Thomas Edison and some of these other, inventors of electricity really started making devices that served as inspiration for certain things. I mean, even Thomas Edison had interest in the paranormal. So they'll look at these devices and they'll say, I don't know, I just don't know what that is. So I might just use your rods or your crystal, because that might be my only way of communicating to you. So that's because, and I truly believe that, when our time comes and we're about to pass over, if our spirits remain in a particular location, I'm sure as the centuries go by, more different types of equipment is going to be created. And of course, it may not even be electrical anymore. It might be something else. And we may look at this equipment and think, I remember using these tools, when I was alive, but I don't remember this kind of stuff. So I don't know how to talk to you. So I'm just going to have to talk you through this. That's the best I can do. So it might also be based on the type of tools you have too, depending on the particular entity.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. That's why I'll usually say, if we're using the K2, I mean, no disrespect to any of our teams, groups, everybody's got their own way of wording things, but you hear someone saying, if you touch that meter, But as you say, it might be a 200-300-year-old spirit who doesn't know what a meter is. So that's how I always say box. I think, well,
Right.
200-300 years ago, they'd know what a box was. You know,
That's right.
Black box on the ground, and we've had a lot of success. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the apps, but we've had a lot of intelligent responses using the K2 meter. And it might sound nuts, but I don't know whether because I say the word box instead of meter, that spirit actually knows better to touch that box there. It's one of these questions you don't know. Gail's got a wee question for you, buddy.
Which day there is a right or wrong way to investigate? Honestly, if I'm correct, I'm not sure if this is if he's asking about like what I investigate during the day or if it's right. Yeah, honestly, I would, because I have done daylight investigations, and there's a popular misconception that these investigations after dark, or you can only like they only really work after dark, or you have to be in the dark for it. That is something I don't really believe in. I'm willing to investigate basically anywhere or any time for the most part, because if you look at because I've done we do something that are called cemetery crawls, and despite its name, it's nothing more than cemetery investigations or tours of cemeteries. In Chicago, we got a number of well-known historic cemeteries. We have Graceland Cemetery. We have Rose Hill Cemetery. Of course, the most notorious of them all is Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. That's a big favorite. We also have one that I've been really interested in wanting to investigate. Of course, again, only during the day. A place called Bur Oak Cemetery, which is located in the town of Alsip. Well, I haven't heard of any ghost stories. It's an interesting location because that was actually where it still is to this day. It's still in use. That's where it was Chicago's first African-American cemetery created, which was created back in 1927, and a place I'd love to investigate, but considering a lot of the racial issues we're having right now, but also there was a major issue that occurred in the cemetery over a decade ago. So, not sure if they're willing to allow us to check it out. But the idea is we got all these different investigations, these cemeteries and some of these locations that I have no problem, going during the day. And some of the activity we've gotten, I think we've probably gotten far more better results during the day than what we've had at night. So in my opinion, there's no real favorite time for me. I'll investigate whenever.
I think what Gail's meaning is, you get these teams that we go out and all right, I'm going to put up, but I've just a couple of comments to Penny. That's who they wouldn't know your sympathy. It's worked great for us, Penny. I can't speak for anybody else, but saying box seems to do the trick. I think. The Perry we've investigated during the day and had really good results as well. Yeah, but, a lot of people think, and I think Hollywood's too. I'm a film buff, but I think Hollywood has got a lot to do with it in these ghost shows because you always kind of go out at night. So you get a lot of newcomers that think, right, we can only go at night time because that's what Most Haunted done, or that's whoever. That's what Ghost Adventures do. They only go out after 10 o'clock. Right. So but you can go to 2 in the afternoon.
Don't get me wrong. Going after dark is definitely a good time to go because that's when a lot of people, if it's a building or something, hey Rosie, another good friend of mine on the network. Going after dark, don't get me wrong, is definitely a good idea. Because again, if it's a building or something, most people would have left, and most people are asleep by then. But there's been a few shows. I've been starting to see this more often in some of the other shows now, where they'll investigate a dark location, but most people will assume that they're investigating at night. What they don't seem to realize is that it's probably like 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because they might have. The reason why it looks so dark is like if they're in a basement or in a room that has no windows, they just simply have the lights off. In reality, it's what looks like nighttime. It's actually broad daylight.
It could be 35 degrees sunshine outside, that's what Gail meant.
That's okay. I thought she was asking about day investigations. Okay, so I don't know if there's necessarily a right or wrong way. I mean, like for me at least, I investigate just the way I do, as well as the rest of my crew. We don't have a particular intention. Certainly, we're not a team that provokes. Again, we're a patient group. We ask simple questions. If we get answers, great. If we don't, well, at least we tried. So then we move on to another location. And Rosie also makes a good point here too, saying she's heard that spirits don't have a concept of time. Yeah, because when you also think about it too, is the reason why, I think one of the reasons why some of these entities may also be arthritis, that might have been when they had died, whether it's again natural causes or suicide or especially murder. I think we can all agree that murder on multiple occasions usually happens when you very least expect it. It doesn't always occur at night. It can happen in broad daylight, and that might have been the time of their demise.
Exactly. It's just quieter at night, so you can hear the sense of that. Trees is bang on.
Yeah.
You can. There's less outside traffic and people about. But as you seen that, you can go down. We've done it. We've investigated in a basement and vaults and that in the middle of the afternoon.
That's right. Yeah. Because so I don't I mean, yeah, during the day it does get noisy, because you always have to worry about the interference. But you know what? Sometimes, here's the reality. I mean, if you look at, again, like where I live at, I mean, I live 20 minutes outside of the city. Even if you're investigating after dark, if it's a location like in a downtown area, there's always going to be noise whatsoever. You cannot really escape it. But and then there are times though that sometimes you do have your lucky moments even during the day, because like I said, some of the cemeteries that I've gone to that we have our cemetery crawls, there's going to be those days where not too many people are going to be around, or you might even be lucky that you may have the whole location to yourself. And that's happened a few times with me, is that we look around, first of all, before we get started, like with recording or filming or anything, just to make sure there's nobody around. Not saying that they're not allowed to be there, just want to make sure that, they don't cause any interference. And once we discover that we got a whole area to ourselves, then the timing especially then doesn't matter, because we now know that whoever is in the cemetery is just us, and there's no other people there, that it can still be quite quiet even during the daylight hours.
But the girls not say there, spirits don't clock on at 10 at night and finish at 6 in the morning. They don't do a night. That's quarter to 10. Make a move. I start in 15 minutes. Or I can't wait to 6 o'clock till I clock off. It's 24. I mean,
you also have those stories out there that they say that these spirits will only appear at a certain time, like moonlit nights, or when it's or when it's raining, or when it's storming, or if it's even snowing. Honestly, I mean, while some of those stories are true, there have been places that I've gone to where we assume that we're probably not going to see it because, well, we're not here at the right time. It's not raining. It's not dark enough yet, or it's not a full moon. Guess what? There's been a few of these places that they still display that type of behavior anyway. So, again, it's a 50-50. Some of them are going to stay true to their title that you have to be there, but for some of these other places, it doesn't always stay true to the urban legend or story.
Exactly. I mean, what's your view on anniversary hauntings? I'll give you an example. It's a Hampton Court Palace we have down here in London, and the ghost of Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife, is said to haunt the Queen's Staircase. Every year on the anniversary of her son's death, she's said to be seen to walk up a staircase holding a candle, because this is where Edward's bedroom was.
Right.
So same as Anne Boleyn, she's meant to be seen at the Tower and Hever Castle on the anniversary, Blinking Hall, on the anniversary of her death.
Right.
What do you think about that?
That's a good question, because when you mentioned that, thinking, yeah, that's right. There's also the anniversary appearances, as I sometimes call them. See, man, that's another because again, I haven't really been to a lot of the places where they have the anniversary, so I don't really have a particular answer, from my experiences, but I think it depends on the particular location, because there was a hotel that I haven't been to, and funny enough, just to basically just make a side note on this, someone recently on YouTube had uploaded a lot of the old pre-Ghost Adventure shows, like a lot of the old Travel Channel shows that used to air on Friday nights. So that gave me a chance to not only go back to kind of my early days when I was studying this stuff, but also relook at some of these locations. And there was one location that there was a show that was called Haunted Hotels, which in my opinion is still one, even though it didn't last for long, it was like kind of like a mini series. I still consider it one of the far better paranormal shows, because unlike a lot of the shows today, this wasn't a show where they investigated, they were trying to get the best evidence. This was just simply a show where they talk about the history, they talk about the activity that occurs, and just a few people sitting, being interviewed, talking about the story. So it's like this was back when paranormal shows were actually ghost stories. And the place that they were, one of the hotels that they were talking about was, again, a place that hasn't really been talked about recently, probably since then. It's a place called the Inn at Shadow Lawn, which is located, I believe it's somewhere up in Rhode Island. And there's a few ghost stories associated with it, but one of the stories that is associated with this place is, I can't remember what her name was, but there was a woman who lived at this mansion back when it actually was a mansion back in 1913. And I'm sure we're familiar with these stories. She had a great husband who was a doctor, but then she later found out that he was having an affair. He even did it a few times, like he was bringing women in right in front of her. And then eventually she snapped and she got a gun and murdered her husband. And she ended up living the rest of her life in shame for what she did until she eventually died. And apparently they say, since it's become a hotel, they say that she appears at this hotel every June. Like, apparently the staff members will say during the month of June, will this be the night when she returns? And I haven't been to the location. I haven't heard of a lot of updates, but it gives that anniversary feeling. But also, in addition, supposedly every year on one day during the month of June, people will also see like an old-fashioned like Model T coming up to the house. And apparently that's supposedly the doctor who was murdered there. And it only occurs on one day. So the idea of the anniversaries, the answer for that, honestly, for me, is still up in the air. I think I have to, if I'm fortunate enough to go to a place like that, hopefully if I'm actually there on the right day, I guess I could pretty much say I'll have to make my decision like once, if that anniversary stuff is true.
Once you're there, Penny, I had that theory altered somewhat when someone told me about the calendars changing in 1752, where the days are out by 9 days. So anything pre-1752 was dated wrong. Bit of a headache to work. I'd imagine it would be.
Right.
What your dates are. What's your theory on, again, I'll talk about Anne Boleyn, because I'm a big Tudors fan, so first thing, one that pops into my head, a spirit in multiple hauntings. Anne Boleyn's said to be seen around about 8 or 9 different locations.
Yes.
Tower of London, Windsor Castle, Blinking Hall,
yep.
Salisbury Hall, Hampton Court Palace. She gets about. It's something the same as the Marilyn Monroe. She's said to be everywhere, basically.
Al Capone is another one. They say he's seen. They supposedly said that he haunts like Alcatraz, where he was locked up, Eastern State Penitentiary, where he was locked up, and then of course even his burial spot in Mount Carmel Cemetery, another cemetery we have here in Chicago, and then even an old hotel that we have called the Manila Hotel, which sadly is no longer. It hasn't been in operation now for almost 60 years. They've been trying to get the place back up and running, but you got all these different locations, like supposedly where Capone is. There's a jail in Indiana, supposedly he was locked up in. But that's the other thing too. But to answer your question, the idea of a particular spirit haunting multiple places, I do think it's possible for some of these spirits to do that, because you have to think to yourself. So kind of like what I said about the tools is perhaps the only reason or way they're actually able to haunt some of these locations is that it might have been their only reminders of the past. So like, let's say like you have one old house that was like pre-17, 1800s. And as time goes by, a lot of the houses around it have been torn down, or they've been replaced by more modern buildings, which, sadly is the case. Usually over here, I can tell you that. I think we do that more than any other country. Sadly, I wish we didn't. And then you also got, and then of course at the same time there may have been another location that they were known to hang out at, or may have visited once in their life, and that building seems to still be standing. And it could be 100 miles or more away. That I guess I think you also have to really kind of look into if what they're actually saying is true. Like, did these individuals had actually stayed? So like I said, for a place like someone like Al Capone or Marilyn Monroe, they claim that they've been there, but they never act. But then you find out saying, well, they never really said anything about them either in their accounts, or they later find out that it was not actually true that they stayed, or like for example, like with Al Capone, you see all the mug shots of him, the photographs of him. You see he's at these particular locations, but you would have thought, for someone who was such a well-known figure, that they would have wanted a photograph with him. Even for someone who was a huge mobster, he was already famous. So, you also kind of have to look at the documents to see if they actually were there in the first place. So the answer of, like the idea of an entity haunting multiple places, I could sure believe that. But I think you also got to really make sure that what they're saying about the history of these locations are true, because you later find out that this person never actually was at this location at all.
You need research.
To research it, and because some of them, they may only have implemented that story in just so they could try to get more fame into it.
Aye, what is it? Selling the ghost or something? It's called. There's a term for the selling.
Yeah, that was. That might have been the name. I can't remember that might have been it, possibly. There was something like that out there.
It's Jennifer for your American team. I think that's the term she puts it. They're selling the ghost, or sold the ghost, or what. Basically, it just means that this place isn't really haunted, but somebody famous visited it, and so they're using this name. A couple of comments to part, buddy, and I got one more question for you.
Sure.
2 seconds, buddy. Teresa's saying, I don't rate paranormal TV programs. There's so much sound and visual effects that can be used plus editing. Just my thought. But I agree with you, Teresa, as well. Yeah. No disrespect, I'm not going to name any, but there is quite a few. Penny, we have that. Someone, Judge Jeffries is supposed to be in about 8 places in the Duke of Monmouth. Again, Teresa's got an interesting comment for you, Nick.
Oh wow! Yeah, go right ahead. Wow, I appreciate that, Teresa.
Night, Justin. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow night, Justin. We'll get Justin tomorrow night. No, well, waiting that, and I have one more question for you. What do you think of the word coincidence?
Sorry, what was the question? You kind of you froze there for a second.
What's your opinion on the word coincidence? You get a lot of part investigations. It's happened to us when 3-4 things might turn off or go wrong in the same, and people say, oh, it's coincidence. Skeptics will say,
right,
coincidence. I mean, an example, a couple of weeks ago, place we're doing now, we always use a locked off camera. We'll sit in the corner, turn it on, and leave it. So this particular time, we went in the Saturday night, got a lot of activity a few minutes in. So I went to review the footage in the locked off camera, and it turned off after about 6.5 minutes. The battery was 3/4 full, and it was right. So we started thinking, well, that's round about the time that things started to happen. But I know a lot of people say it's coincidence.
Yeah. So to answer that question, it's again another interesting one. I mean, some people will say that, if you have the tools like too close together, they'll all go off, independent. Well, they'll all go off all at once. Well, for starters, with the battery situation, if the battery is drained, I'll tell you this. I mean, even when I'm putting my tools together, I have a battery tester with, so I always check first to make sure if the batteries aren't, dead or close to being dead. I mean, even if they're still in the middle of their juice, I always check them anyway just to make sure, because it takes several hours for batteries to completely drain. They don't drain in just an hour or just a few minutes, unless again they're right at the edge of their battery life. So the batteries, for the most part, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily fully say it's a coincidence. Only if they're near the end of their lives anyway. But in terms of the tools, I mean, excuse me. Sometimes, I mean, at first I did start going off as a coincidence, but when the tools are going off, well, put it this way, there have actually been a few times, because sometimes I don't have a choice, where we might have one table, and we got some newcomers that have never been on an investigation, which was the case down at a place called the I can't remember the name of it, but it was down in Mattoon, Illinois, which is close down. It was more central Illinois. It was at an old mental health center, which is still in use, but they got to allow us to investigate it. So I had all the tools put together on one table, because this was not really a place that you could really put them all in different spots. It was a smaller room. But despite that, a lot of the tools were all together. Most of the time, a lot of those tools didn't really go off. I mean, they never really went off all at once. Only a few did. So it was almost like as if whatever was there, it only seemed to choose just certain items. So would I call it a coincidence that it was just a few items, not everything? I don't think so, because if it was a coincidence, then everything would have gone off completely. Instead, only a few items did. So apparently it had a liking to some items. So in terms of coincidences, I would maybe every once in a while say maybe it is, because I mean, even though I'm a full believer, I think we all have to be skeptical, partially, because which plays a very important role. That's why, again, I'm more careful of what happens, because I always walk around first. I always make sure. I also make sure too, especially when it comes to newcomers, because you got those thrill seekers out there. I also try to make sure nobody's cheating, that they're creating the supposed activity. But once you've checked everything and making sure no one's having other type of electronics, or not, or if they do have electronics but still a good distance away, and the stuff starts, things start occurring, I think then or the all these devices are going, well, some of the devices are going off. I think it's probably best to say then that it can't just be always a simple coincidence.
We've had that. Right. Here we go. Here's your.
Oh, this is what she was saying. Okay. What about the music? Okay. Well, I could say this for her. Picking up a father-grandfather figure, I will say this though. I was very close to my grandfather when he was alive. It was my dad's dad. He was someone I was close to even when I was younger. Sadly, he died now almost a decade back in 2013. In fact, he actually died 2 days after my 20th birthday. So, but we were fortunate enough to celebrate it together beforehand. As for the music, I mean, he and I, we watched more old television shows than music, but we still got our good share of like old music from like the 60s, from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, because obviously, understandably, that was the music he grew up with. Had he still been alive today now, he actually would have been over 100 years old. He was born back in 1917, so he lived a very long life. He lived up to the age of 96, and the last few weeks, actually, prior to his death, I actually was taking care of him, at a time when others couldn't. I actually stayed at his house, and that was a good way of me, spending the last few weeks with him before he passed. But for the music, I think I can kind of picture exactly what he would be saying is because again, I grew up with that music too. You know, I may be a much younger person, but I always stick to. I mean, I like a lot of the indie rock music. I like metal music, but growing up, I've always had an interest with oldies music. So it's something that I can kind of picture exactly what Teresa's saying.
Thank you, Teresa Doll. Thank you for that, honey.
Thank you. I've always suspected my grandfather, even though I've never, seen him or heard him. I always believe he comes back to visit every once in a while to see how I'm doing.
Just to keep a wee eye on you, as they say, a wee eye. Just before we wind it up, Nick, we are a Scottish channel, as you know, and you told me before we came on live that you do. However, you saying something about you misplacing your shoe or boots. You see, looking under your bed.
Yeah, my shoes do get misplaced a lot. But normally that's downstairs though, so I don't really keep shoes upstairs. But I do have some what do they call them? The special type of shoes that sometimes people wear once they get out of bed. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, those. I have those.
We call them slippers. Thanks again, Teresa. So I was saying, as you know, we're a Scottish channel. You told us before we started the live that you've actually got Scottish roots somewhere along the line.
So that's actually something I'm still learning right now because it was only really, to be honest with you, just a few weeks ago that I discovered it. And I know not everyone always buys into it, but it was not through the website Ancestry.com because I was talking to my mom at one point and we were talking briefly about my origins because in addition to now learning that I'm part Scottish, I also have and of course, I told you too, I also have Italian as well as Irish background. My dad's side of the family is mostly Italian. My mom's side is Irish. But I think further down the line in my mom's family is where part of the Scottish background came from. I wish I had a little bit more information to figure out, but I guess I don't know if it was through my grandparents or my great-grandparents. I'm going to assume probably one of the two pairs that we must have. I mean, obviously, we obviously would have had someone who used to live in Scotland that had some type of association with us. So because of that connection, that's where I guess supposedly we have part of the Scottish background. So I wish I had more to say, but the
fact that you've got a wee bit of Scottish in you is you see everybody wants a bit of Scotland. Everybody wants a bit of Scotland. Just one wee last coin that your grandma's showing me or make you a meal from beans and potatoes.
Oh wow, how about that? I think here. That could have been my other. You know what? Just saying what I was just saying could have been my other grandmother because for my mom's side, because like I said, also being part Irish, so adding that part of my family came from Ireland. I know they make a lot of potatoes and stuff like that. So it could be, maybe it could be. I guess it could be both of my grandparents. It could be any one of them.
Well, Penny's got a bit of Scottish in there as well. Penny, well, that's true, Wallace. I actually never noticed that before, Penny. Sorry, no. But our surname, obviously, after the man himself, Mr. William Wallace. So just before we go, Nick, this is your time to plug your group and what have you, plug your stuff, as we say.
Sure.
Floor's yours.
Well, for those that want to find me, of course, obviously, I'm always open to new connections. If anyone wants to add me on Facebook, as you see here on the screen, that's how my name is. I'm also I also do have a group page which is called Nick's Paranormal Force. Originally, it was made just for my team, but we decided to expand it so you can find me on Nick's Paranormal Force. And then in addition to, I also have been co-hosting a few different shows. Like I said earlier, Tom, Amy, and Carrie were watching the show briefly. They are some of the co-hosts. We do a show that's called Paranormal Mysteries, which we do every Friday at 2 p.m. CST here in Chicago and 8 p.m. UK time. And currently, the network that I've been a part of, we're actually, I can't say too much about it because we haven't made it a public announcement yet. But there's going to be a few new changes to the network. But I've also been doing the show now. I've also been doing a show called The Petri Dish, which I kind of dub it as the U.S. show because it comprises of myself and a few other people from the U.S. In other words, it's like I do both a show for the U.S. and the U.K. So you can find me at my profile, Nick's Paranormal Force, or I'll be sharing them. I always share them. You can find us also on our shows that we do, which is every Friday for Paranormal Mysteries. The other show we're currently taking a break from. So in the meantime, that's Paranormal Mysteries is the one that's still going to be going on.
We'll give it I like to let our guests plug their thing now, because sometimes in the past I've done it and I've got details wrong, or an email address wrong. So if the guest gets it wrong, they can't blame me.
They can't.
They just say me. Says your email address, you got it wrong. That is it. Thanks, Perry. So it was interesting. Great to meet you, Nick. So that's it. I'll hold on to you for a wee minute or two after we come off, Nick, if that's all right, buddy. Thanks very much to everybody who came in to chat tonight. All your comments, your questions. We're back tomorrow night with Justin Clifford, who was in the chat earlier on for SOS Paranormal. We're back on at 9 o'clock with him tomorrow night. And big thanks to Nick for sparing us that's 2 hours we were on.
Yeah, we were. Yes, absolutely. My pleasure. This was definitely a lot of fun. At some point, too, I know we've said this before, some point, too, I'd like to get you guys onto our show, Paranormal Mysteries.
Anytime, buddy. Anytime. So until tomorrow night, folks, we'll take care and we'll see you then. So bye for now, folks.